Well, it's a little noisy on this walkway. You can take a look at it up there. It's a walkway I'm underneath. I was across the street there behind the tree, but the ranger said I couldn't stay there either, even though I was quite a few feet away from, 20, dozens of feet away from most people. But they got to close the park. They closed it. So now I'm on the street underneath the walkway bridge. Hopefully they don't claim this as their territory. But anyway, we're looking at evolution creation. We're looking at the laws of the universe and these constants that the whole universe has never shown evidence of not abiding by these laws and constants and from the beginning. So who put them there at the beginning? They couldn't have evolved. They had to be there in the first place in order for evolution to work, because the record of the evolutionists says that they've always operated this way as we see things operate today. Kind of shoot themselves in the foot. So who put the laws there in the first place? Intelligent designer. And amoeba didn't do it. In any case, we'll look for Geoffrey Burbidge, director of the Kitt Peak National Observatory, University of California. He wrote a book called Stellar Structure. And he says if stars did not exist, it would be easy to prove that this complete disappearance of stars is what we expect from what we observe happening in the universe. Well, it's because we see them burning up. We see them dissipating rather rapidly. We don't see them coming into existence, and so we would expect them all eventually not to be there. And they're dissipating rapidly, far faster than the billions of years they should have been existing around. So the universe must be young on that basis alone. The second law of thermodynamics say they should dissipate, and if billions of years have transpired, then they shouldn't even be here. So much for the evolutionary point of view. Then we have beautiful objects that we observe in the sky. Here we have Andromeda Galaxy, a disk-like assemblage of some billions of stars. And so we see the star as an organized body, and then we see stars themselves organized into formations by uncountable numbers, by the billions and more. How did they get that way? Well, they didn't get that way in accordance with the second law of thermodynamics, which is de-evolving. In fact, we noticed a statement by Geoffrey Burbidge of the University of California, San Diego, writing in Scientific American. This was February '92. He says, we have no satisfactory theory of how galaxies and larger structures formed. Galaxies cannot form by gravitational collapse in an expanding universe. Now, it's easy to make the calculations. A little throat lozenge there. We're told by evolutionists that the universe is expanding, and this is an outward dissipative force, whereas you have to have them collected in an inward direction to get them organized. If you calculate the expansive and the attractive forces required, it proves that. You just can't get stars and galaxies to form, given the laws of science as we observe them today. And yet, there they are. We see beautiful pictures like the Sombrero Galaxy, a tremendous organization of billions of stars. There they are. And how did they get there? How did they get organized? Well, not in accordance with the second law of thermodynamics. An intelligent designer had to create them all at once, and then from then on they devolved. Martin Rees, a famous astrophysicist, is quoted in the Dallas Morning News in '88, saying the most basic questions about galaxies are still not understood. If galaxies didn't exist, we would have no problem explaining that fact, because the universe, to them, is so old galaxies can't exist. Dallas Morning News. Compare a quotation from Dr. Patton's note on this subject. It seems that the more we learn about the basic laws of nature, the more those laws seem to tell us that the visible matter, the stuff we can see, shouldn't be arranged the way it is. There shouldn't be galaxies out there at all. And even if there are galaxies, they shouldn't be grouped together the way they are. The problem of explaining the existence of galaxies has proved to be one of the thorniest in cosmology. By all rights, they just shouldn't be there, especially if, according to the evolutionists, the universe is billions of years old. Yet there they sit. It's hard to convey the frustration that this simple fact induces among scientists. Despite what you may read in the press, we still have no answers to the question of why the sky is full of galaxies, although we've succeeded in eliminating many wrong answers. All right. James Trefil, professor of physics, George Mason University, dark side of the universe. Some problems with stars except multiplied a billion times. If you can get the material condensed enough, you can find gravitational collapse taking over everywhere. But how do you get it to that point? With stars, you can imagine that, but you can't get it to the point where it starts. And then with galaxies, you can calculate the amount of mass that ought to be there to hold it together. But better than 90% of the mass necessary to hold it together is unobserved. We can't find it. It's called by evolutionists the missing mass. And then we look at formations like barred and spiraled galaxies. These straight bars of star formations, which appear to be dissecting the spiral galaxies, are amazing if they have been spinning as long as we have. We have been told by the evolutionists. That organizational structure that we see would wrap itself up, according to Kepler's third law, in just a few thousand years. We see the principle illustrated with spinning ice skaters. They hold their arms out. They spin more slowly, and as they pull them in, they spin faster. Likewise with these barred spiral galaxies that are spinning very rapidly, more rapidly than evolutionist theories can account for. The interior would spin faster, and the outer part would spin more slowly. And if you got a bar through the middle, how in the world did you get it there? They don't know. It would wrap itself up and self-destruct in just a few thousand years. Maybe that's all the universe is old. Yet there they are. How did they get there? How did they stay there? Especially if the universe is billions of years old. Not only do we see organizational structure of stars within galaxies, but we see organizational structures of multiple galaxies themselves. And here we see a globular cluster of thousands, if not billions of galaxies. And that is mind-boggling. The global cluster of billions of galaxies, which are organizations of billions of stars, which are organizations of immense amounts of matter. We see a great organization. How do you account for that by natural law? Well, consider the struggles that have been expressed in Discover magazine in 1988 by Nobel laureate in an article entitled "The Big Bang Never Happened." He says, for years, astrophysicists have invoked some kind of dark matter to explain why spiral galaxies rotate as fast as they do and why galaxy clusters do not fly apart. Extra gravity needed to form the galaxies and clusters in the first place. And as he talks about the extra gravity needed to form the galaxies and clusters in the first place, that they can't account for, the mass is missing, he says, and that would necessarily be produced the extra gravity. They rotate too fast. Why don't they fly apart? They should. How do you get them to form in the first place? How are we told we are looking at some 1 million galaxies and we see organizational structure that ties these galaxies together? And we're told about the Great Wall, which expands over hundreds of millions of light years, even billions of years. The Big Bang that has been proposed as an explanation cannot begin to account for others for it. Consider this statement by a number of leading astronomers in the world. Arp, Burbidge, Hoyle, and others. The Big Bang model offers a universe created in a smooth, featureless condition, out of which a highly structured universe is nevertheless supposed to have evolved. Simplicity into complexity, but no evidence of how it got there. Numerous attempts have been made to explain how this miracle is supposed to have happened. Little more than ingenious hand-waving. Perhaps this is why they are called scenarios. They're just stories made up to try to explain it, according to the second law of thermodynamics, ignoring the attraction of mass, unless you imagine a lot of matter, 90% of which is missing. Maybe they say that's all dark matter. I need to scratch my nose, but I'm going to do it not with a rubber hose. I have a spoon here. What you observe is highly organized structure, which is dissipating. Now that's precisely what the creationists would predict, but it is hardly what the evolutionists would predict. Some of them have faced it, although most of them do not. They're very practiced and professional at seeing the opposite of what's actually observed. What we observed is deterioration. We see organization there, but it's going downhill. That's what the second law predicts. That's what the most fundamental generalization scientists have ever been able to make about the universe. That's what we see, but they imagine just the opposite. Consider Lipson, professor of physics, University of Manchester, writing the Physics Bulletin. He says, I think, however, that we should go further than this and admit that the only accepted explanation is creation. I know that this is an anathema to physicists, as it is to me, but we must not reject a theory that we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Wow, honesty. And I think that makes sense. We're supposed to go by the facts, the experimental evidence. Consider a statement in Fundamental of Classical Thermodynamics, a textbook that just states what the necessary implications of these observations are. We see the second law of thermodynamics as a description of the prior and continuing work of a creator who also holds the answer to our future destiny and that of the universe. Dr. Patton said that. G.J. Weiland, Richard Sontag, Fundamentals of Classical Thermodynamics, 1985. Now that's a brave statement made by the ones who are writing textbooks, who are authorities in the field. Dr. Patton says, I think all suggested accounts of the origin of the solar system are subject to serious objections. The conclusion is the present state of the subject would be that the system cannot exist. Sir Jeffreys, Cambridge, the Earth. All of the hypotheses so far presented have failed or remain unproved when physical theory is properly applied. Fred Whipple, Harvard, orbiting the sun. It is far easier, he says, to explain why the moon shouldn't be there than to explain its existence. The greatest puzzle, Toxo says, the greatest puzzle is where all the order in the universe came from originally. How did the cosmos get wound up if the second law of thermodynamics predicts asymmetric unwinding toward disorder? Paul C.W. Davies, King's College, London. The evolutionist is plagued with an immediate observation that the universe is somewhat in chaos. He interprets this as the second law of thermodynamics, which states that everything is increasing in random order, but complex to less complex. This second law of thermodynamics demands that there had to have been a time in the past when everything was in perfect synchronization, that is, orchestral creation. The first law of thermodynamics is one of energy conservation. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. The second law of thermodynamics can basically be stated that in spite of this conservation, the energy available for useful work does decrease, so that the universe can be said to be running down. Example, the sun's energy is dissipating via heat into the universe. This dissipation of raw energy into the universe, such as from the sun, is observed to cause destructive, devolving, and not a constructive, evolving effect. So everything is devolving, not evolving. Back to Genesis. Henry Morris wrote a book that is very good. Evolutionists have a most amazing faith. They believe that people have evolved up from the ape, or something like an ape, that apes and other mammals have evolved from reptiles, reptiles from amphibians, amphibians from fish, fish from some unknown phylum of multicelled invertebrates, and that all invertebrates or all their phyla evolved from some unknown protozoan, that some other unknown protozoan evolved from complex chemicals, and that complex chemical elements evolved from the simplest chemical element of all, namely hydrogen. The operative word in the above sentence is believe. There is no evidence for this remarkable chain of events. Apes and reptiles, invertebrates and invertebrates and chemical elements, including hydrogen, still are here and